episode 3 of Behind the Plate with Maren and Nate, and along with Hale Varsity softball writer Maren Angus Combs. I'm Nate Rohr, the voice of Huskers softball, as we open up week 3 of this podcast and take a look at all things Huskers softball, Big Ten softball, college softball. Of course, we're just about ready to open conference play. The Huskers will open league play at home against Purdue this weekend, and then they'll take on the Iowa Hawkeyes in the midweek doubleheader, and we'll be joined by Iowa head coach Renee Gillespie and get a look at what the Hawkeyes have done to this point in the year. And I can beg forgiveness for how I have power rated them or unpower rated them throughout the season, but we'll be interested to talk to Renee Gillespie about her team. And just Maren, we'll start with that. What are your impressions of Iowa thus far?
Yeah, Iowa, I've been so high on Iowa so far this year, and it's simply because I watched them in person and they passed the eye test for me, and they've got their pitching staff has been tremendous. Vasquez has really turned it around.
Mm-hmm.
They have the freshman Jalen Adams. They've got Delaney Lecker. Thank you. Depending on you for some of my
yes. You type, I talk.
Yes. That's how it goes. And it's just and Delaney's a two-way player. Mm-hmm. She's able to give you some innings, and she is the power in that lineup. Mm-hmm. She's far and away the most RBIs in that lineup. And they're just a fun, gritty team to watch. And they're under the radar. Like, Iowa doesn't really, at least for softball, they're not flashy. They're not at the top of the standings every year. They're just kind of there.
Yeah.
And I think this year they're really going to give some teams a run for their money.
Well, they certainly have a lot of depth in their pitching staff. Team ERA under 2 as action begins this week. And, it was an Iowa program that once upon a time stood with Northwestern and Michigan among the top of the Big Ten Conference. However, since the retirement of Gail Blevins, it's just felt like that program is kind of wandering in the woods. And I know Renee Gillespie is trying to turn it around, but she just has not been able to do it to this point. But it seems, again, like they at least have the pitching staff to get it done. I don't know if the offense is there yet, and we'll certainly get a look at that here in the next week, where they start at Penn State, arguably the best pitching staff in the Big Ten, and then they'll host Nebraska for a pair. So that's jumping into the deep end. So we're going to get a really good impression of where Iowa is in the first week of Big Ten play. But of course, this podcast takes a pretty deep look into the Cornhuskers. And so let's talk about Nebraska softball. Nebraska 19-9 on the year, a 3-1 week last week. Nebraska sweeps Omaha in a doubleheader that I know you took in over at Connie Clausen Field. Then, because of weather, they were only able to play 2 games. I know we were concerned about the weather when we chatted last week, and as it turned out, the weather was horrible. But at any rate, Huskers go down to Lawrence. They hammer Kansas City 12-2, which was expected, but then they lose to Kansas 6-4. The Jayhawks come from behind to defeat the Huskers, and really a disappointing loss in my book, Maren, as I look at it, because, Nebraska got out to the early lead. Any worries that you might have had about the Huskers spinning their wheels, long week off, starting slow, those were dispelled. Then Kansas is able to chip away. They get a run in the first, and then Nebraska boosts the lead to 3-1. And then that 5th inning, Sarah Harness struggles out of the bullpen for Nebraska, and that's not a good sign for this Husker team. Nebraska needs Sarah Harness to get people out, and she was not able to do it against Kansas. She walks 2, she allows 2 hits, and if the Huskers are to succeed, especially with Kaylin Kinney out, Harness is going to have to pitch better.
She really does, and it's going to be interesting to see how they continue to use the 2 pitchers, right? Because that's really all there is 2 pitchers. And we're seeing Courtney Wallace start games and then having to come out of the bullpen in the next game. And you're going to overuse her. I hate to say it, but Courtney Wallace she's not Montana Fouts.
No.
She's not going to strike out everyone. She's going to pitch to contact. She's going to need to, her defense is going to have to get outs behind her. And the more you have a contact pitcher like that throw, the more she's going to get hit.
Right. And you put that defense out there. I think Nebraska feels pretty good about what they have defensively, but just the more chances they have, the tougher it's going to be for them. But you just worry about overexposure where, if Courtney Wallace has to face a lineup 7 times, 8 times in a weekend, it's going to be very difficult for her.
Yeah.
And from an offensive standpoint, that puts a ton of pressure on you. And maybe that's the operative word in all this, pressure, because when Sarah Harness was at her best in the early part of the year, Kaylin Kinney was there.
Right.
And Courtney Wallace was there. And so you had any of 3 pitchers on whom you could rely to start. And, you're not going to play more than 2 games in a weekend. So you sit there with the idea that you've got a really good pitcher in the bullpen that you weren't planning on starting. And so you, as Sarah Harness or Courtney Wallace or Kaylin Kinney, can feel like you've got somebody behind you. As the pitching is set up now, Courtney Wallace is starting game 1. She'll start Friday night against Purdue. She'll start the first game of the Iowa doubleheader. She's your ace right now. As Sarah Harness, game 2 is yours. You must throw well in game 2. And unfortunately, I wonder if that pressure has gotten into her head a little bit as she throws that second game and as she thinks she has to be too fine. She has to be too perfect. And remember, Sarah's coming off an injury from last year. So there are times where she's looked at 100%, but it's one thing to come out firing at the beginning of the year. It's another thing a month into the season, 6 weeks into the season, to still be sharp. And unfortunately, Sarah's not there right now.
Yeah. But maybe playing Purdue to open up conference play is a blessing in disguise. Because watching Purdue play over the weekend at Ole Miss, that's a team that's on the struggle bus. And as a pitcher, going in, they have one phenomenal hitter in their lineup. Everything else is average or below average. So when you attack that lineup, attack the top of the lineup, and then you can take a deep breath and relax maybe a little bit. But like you said, she's got to be on it, because right now she's got double-digit hit batters. Her strikeout to walk ratio is almost 2 to 1. However, you just gotta think maybe the pressure's getting to her a little bit. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, against Kansas, didn't retire a batter, and that Kansas lineup's okay, but they're bottom half of the Big Ten. Even against Omaha, she was not dominant, and that Mav lineup is decent, but they're not a lineup that really wows you. They're not a top-notch mid-major lineup. They've got a few decent hitters toward the top, but you felt like that was an opportunity for her to get right. She didn't allow a hit, but she walks 2 and allows a run. And so even against Omaha, it's still not sharp. It's still where you might walk out to the circle feeling like, okay, I'm good, because they're not going to do much against me.
No.
And so it's a tough spot for Sarah. I know, like I said, she's coming off an injury. She was the ace for Southern Illinois last year. And so she's used to a big role in the circle for whomever she's pitching for. But right now she's just wild, and you need to be able to rely on her every time you give her the ball, especially with Kaylin Kinney out. And right now you just can't do it, and perhaps even quite the opposite. So, and you don't want to pin loss on somebody individually. I mean, Nebraska put up 4 runs in that game against KU, and maybe you ought to be able to do a little more than that against the Jayhawks. And but at the same time, the pitching position is so important, and we know that in all bat and ball sports. Baseball, softball, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be able to pitch it, and you need to have a couple people to pitch it. And right now, Nebraska just simply does not have that.
Yeah. And as we go into conference play with 2 pitchers that Nebraska is relying on, the offense is going to have to come through in more ways than one. And my opinion, my theory on this is, especially this weekend, they need to jump out early. They need to jump out often. I honestly think they need at least 1 run rule win to shorten up the weekend.
Yeah, to save innings.
Right.
Especially in a space where you have 5 games in 5 days. I think you're exactly right. I think if you're the offense, you've got to put it on yourself and say, all right, our pitching carried us the first 2.5 weeks of the year.
Yeah.
It's time to put them on our backs and take care of them and give them some margin for error. And I think you're exactly right. This team needs to look to put up first inning runs. And it's been pretty good about doing that this year. I mean, for heaven's sakes, Billy Andrews has 5 leadoff home runs this year. But you need to put up some first inning runs, some first time through the order runs, just to give Sarah and Courtney some breathing room and some margin for error. The good news is, I think against this Purdue staff, you're going to be able to do that.
Yeah. And if you look at Purdue, what they're coming off of, right? They're coming off of a loss to North Dakota State. They beat Samford, who beat Ole Miss. They beat St. Thomas 6-2, but they got run ruled twice against Ole Miss.
Right.
And that's what you have to work off of. I mean, you hate to kick someone when they're down, but I mean, in this case, you got to kick them when they're down, because that's
right. You need to shorten games. You need to cut innings, and let's profile Ole Miss. I mean, they're not winning the Southeastern Conference this year. They're gonna have an uphill climb to make regionals. Now, the last couple of years, basically everybody has made it from the SEC to regionals, so they could be a regional team. But that just goes to show they were able to do that against Purdue, and hopefully this Husker lineup is able to do likewise, because right now I think there's a little teeth gnashing, there's a little worry, a little uneasiness. Until the Wichita State weekend, I think you could say Nebraska had met or exceeded expectations.
Yes.
To that point in the year. Lose both of them at Wichita State. By themselves, losing 2 games to a ranked team on their home field is bad, but it is not bad. But I do think it's a black mark to not find a way to win one of those games. But, tournament season, stuff happens. Okay, that's fine. But the Kansas loss casts everything in a different light, because you're talking, Wichita State's going to regionals.
Right.
They very well could win the American Athletic Conference. They have one of the top lineups in college softball. So you don't like that you lost to them, but you feel you can explain it.
Yeah.
Is the short of it. Kansas, on the other hand, there's not much there. And you look at how you build an NCAA resume. This Kansas loss is probably going to go in the bad loss column. And
I would agree with that.
And again, by itself, it isn't damning. I mean, hey, Nebraska lost a couple games to San Diego last year and was able to overcome it. But the fact that it comes on the heels of 0-2 against Wichita State, it becomes a trend at the absolute worst time. But, I mentioned this to you before we began. Last year when Nebraska got done with the Kansas weekend, they were 19-9. Nebraska right now is 19-9. And yet, I don't know that you feel as good about this team as you did last year's.
No, but I would cue the Twilight Zone music right there.
So that means Nebraska's going to go on an 18-game winning streak. I think
I'll take it.
That's precisely what that means. Boy, if they did that, I'd be all right. that would mean a very good chance at a Big Ten championship for Nebraska, and of course, that would mean the Huskers would go through and they'd beat Michigan and they'd sweep Maryland. And man, that would be a big time start to Big Ten play for the Huskers and really set them up well in the early part of Big Ten play. We'll talk a little more about the Big Ten as we go along here, Maren, but as conference play begins, just what are your overall impressions on the league, and what are you looking forward to in this first week of league play?
Yeah, this past weekend, your pick of Northwestern, there they are. They have arrived.
Yes, I've been holding that stock for a little while nervously, but
they have arrived. The Northwestern came on. Man, that was a good weekend for them. It was a good weekend for Danielle Williams.
Mm-hmm.
They beat Auburn twice. Auburn's ranked in the top 25. I believe they were ranked number 21. However, getting 2 wins against a ranked opponent is phenomenal. And it was not an easy tournament field that they played in. They were in Oklahoma City.
Right.
They're hosted by those Oklahoma Sooners.
And they played them tough, played them to within a run. So that was impressive. And we'll talk a little more about the Big Ten as we go along here. But we are pleased to be joined on Behind the Plate with Maren and Nate by the head coach of the Iowa Hawkeyes. She has arrived. Her name is Renee Gillespie, and she leads the Hawkeyes as they prepare for the first week of Big Ten play. They'll start out at Penn State and then host Nebraska in a doubleheader next week. And Coach Gillespie, first off, welcome in. What are the overriding impressions you've had of your Hawkeyes through the first month or so of the season?
You can hear me okay?
I can hear you great. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Okay.
I can hear you.
I wasn't sure how this thing was working. You gotta give me a second here. We really 6 weeks on the road has been a really tough schedule for us. Being in California, Florida, getting a chance to see some great competition throughout the season. Very young team. At times we may have 6 freshmen starting for us in any one game. So just excited where we are right now. Excited for going into the Big Ten series this weekend with Penn State, and then again, like we're talking about, Nebraska on Tuesday with a doubleheader.
Coach, it's great to see you again. It's I was so excited to watch your team play out in Palm Springs, especially after you threw Jalen Adams, a true freshman, against UCLA, and then you threw her again against Texas. Just the poise that she has as a true freshman. What can you say about her?
Oh, just she wants the ball. We're so excited. Her mom was her coach in high school. Very competitive high school program at Fort Dodge, Iowa. Won state championships. She's the kind of player that you love having on the mound because first thing she says when she knows we're going up against Texas goes, "Coach, I want the ball. I want the ball." And that's what you want out of a pitcher. You want someone that's fearless. And putting her in the UCLA game, seeing how well she did, just how she's fired up, how they play, how our team plays behind her. It's just an incredible experience for her and for us to see. We've got 4 more years with her, which is exciting.
You talk about Jalen Adams wanting the ball. It's got to be a fight when you discuss who's going to start a game for you. You've got 4 pitchers that have thrown around 30 innings and you've thrown 6 different pitchers. How do you parse out all that work with the pitching staff that seems like you've got quite a few options?
Yeah, I rely on Mandy Gardner for all that. I've been pitching coach for over 25 years, and Mandy came into the program. I had Rick Dillinger last year, did a fantastic job for us. And being able to hand that over to Mandy's hands has been incredible. She has the pitchers believing in themselves, really working hard. They're probably some of the hardest working athletes we have on our team right now. So she's got them going. She gets them understand what it's like to be competitive, what it's like to be able to throw your best pitch in the best counts, and she teaches them not to be nervous, to relax and throw your game, and trust in her and what she's calling. She does a great job of the scouting reports on all the players, all the teams that we're facing against. So she does a wonderful job of setting that up. So I put all the kudos to Mandy on getting the pitchers ready. And it is, I mean, having 4, even 5, I think you see Emma in there a little bit too, having a few innings. She came out strong even this last weekend through some good games for us. So we're looking really, 4 to 5 strong going into the Penn State series, which is nice, having 3-game series instead of 5 on a weekend. We got some leverage there going into the weekend.
You talk about the job that Mandy's done with your pitchers. I want to highlight Brianna Vasquez for a minute, because if we look at what she did last year, she finished the year 6-14 with an ERA of over 4.5. Mm-hmm. And this season she's 9-2 with an ERA of under 1.5. What has been the biggest change in her, and what has helped really with her turnaround?
I think what we talked about, I think it's just her believing in herself. Bree's always had the capabilities of being, a top program. I actually recruited her to UCF. She stayed at UCF when I took the job here at Iowa. We were lucky enough that she wanted to transfer after junior year and got a chance to have 2 years with her. But for her, it was just having confidence in her pitches, having confidence in her coaches, being able to have, knowing that her teammates have her back. And I think over this year, and especially with Mandy's help and with a very young team this year, she knows that they have their back in every game that she throws. She has that confidence to be able to throw a pitch in any situation, know the defense has her back on it. So I think a lot of it was, she worked hard, no question about it. Summertime, she went home and worked hard. And then wintertime, she came back, was even stronger than she was in the fall. But I think for her, it was really about the confidence, about the team believing in her, coaches believing in her, and just pitching her game. And it's wonderful. Yes, coaches, we love seeing that. We love seeing the smile on her face. We love knowing that she's going out there and having a blast. And she's having a year of her life right now.
Chatting with Iowa head coach Renee Gillespie here on Behind the Plate with Maren and Nate, and the Hawkeyes Open Conference play at Penn State. Let's flip the picture over to the offense, and specifically Carter, who's your leading hitter at this point in the year. Talk a little bit about what she brings to the table, Nia Carter.
Yeah, Nia's kind of been the same situation. Her freshman year, she lit it up across the conference, and she every year she's kind of developing herself with a little bit more arsenal. She can lay down a bunt for a hit. She can hit behind runners. She can drive in, with a double, drive in runs. I mean, she just is so versatile in what she does. This year, she just has made a decision to, as her senior year, she just wants to have a great year, be relaxed, trust in herself, do what she needs to do for the team. And those little changes in her mindset, you can really see how she's relaxed when she's at the plate. Very confident what she's doing right now. And you're seeing some great results on that. Even throughout the last 6 weekends, you see her bunt for a hit, get on. You see her bases loaded, second and third, and she's driving runners in. She's just doing those little things right and having a blast doing it.
You look at your team at this point, 18-11. You're in your 4th year as Iowa's head coach. I'm sorry. I'm stepping all over you, Maren. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. It's episode 3, Nate.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah. No, my big question actually is about Delaney, or Denali. My bad. I'm all thrown off now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Denali. Yep.
Anyway, she has been your run producer, right? She's 29 RBIs, far and away your biggest RBI leader. And she can also give you innings in the circle. Like, I mean, it's such a gift to have a two-way player, right? And I feel like over the last couple of years, having two-way players it just sets you apart. So what can you say about her run production, and being able to step in the circle when you need her?
Yeah, she here another Iowa grown player. I mean, she loves the University of Iowa coming in. She's had a goal from day one of being All-American. She understands how hard that is to do. And she understands that she has to be able to be more than just a hitter, more than just a pitcher. So she's taken upon herself to really develop herself as a top athlete. Like you said, we've got some great innings from her on the mound, but hidden wise, she's a tough out. I think it's hard to walk her. A lot of people have tried to walk her and they have one mistake and she's taken it over the fence. She's very tough out. And when you see her and the way that she plays, she's a force. When you talk about having a player where you can have one player change the course of the game, she's that player. With one swing, she can totally change the game for us. And so we're excited that she understands and kind of takes that role. She's hitting 4 in the lineup for us and has been producing, like you said, throughout the entire season. And I just, with all these players, you just see that they are really enjoying playing. They're understanding their role as a team. They're fighting for each other. They're fighting for the program. And Denali is kind of that leader for us. You see her out there and she just wants it. She wants the win. She wants to be competitive. She wants to be able to bring the runs in. And she's been doing that all season long.
Chatting with Renee Gillespie, the head coach of the Iowa Hawkeyes, here on Behind the Plate. And Coach, you mentioned that Lecker is an Iowa girl, and you also have several Iowa players. Mm-hmm. Obviously, every team begins their recruiting with their in-state picture. In recent years, before your tenure, great players have left the state of Iowa and gone on to success elsewhere in the Big Ten, even nationally. What's the key for you in terms of closing the borders in the state of Iowa to where you can use that homegrown talent to build your program back up to where it was in the late 90s and early 2000s?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was our number one goal coming in to taking over this program was, Gail Blevins did that in the late 90s, 2000s. She had a majority of her players were from Iowa. She won several regionals, Big Ten championships, and then she's been in the World Series, and you see what she did with the program back then and how she used the Iowa players to be able to get a base of her program. We knew that that's where we had to go. And it was hard to watch so many Iowa players, great players that are playing for Minnesota, playing for Missouri, playing for Texas, playing for, Florida. I mean, they were just, if we had those players at Iowa when I took over, it would be in the World Series. I mean, that's how much talent we have in Iowa. So being able, like you said, is lock down the borders and get the best players out of Iowa to stay in Iowa was our biggest challenge. And not having a winning program with it, it was tough at first. You want to go where people are winning. And for us to get some of those top players out our first year was a tough task. But like Denali, you look at Tori Bennett at shortstop and Hannah Streff at second base, both freshmen, both Iowa kids. They're solidifying our base. You got Doster that's behind the plate as a catcher, and she's also a Fort Dodge kid. And so we worked really hard to try to keep those top players in Iowa, and you're seeing the result of that. Denali's the one of our top leaders, and she's bringing in the players from Iowa now. You're seeing us win. You're seeing us developing back to where we were back in the 90s and 2000s. So we're getting those players now. We have Jenna Young that's coming in from Winterset. We're excited about her. She's the number one shortstop in the state of Iowa. So we're getting those players and we're starting to get that base down. But that was absolutely our number one goal is lock down those borders and keep those Iowa top 1% of those Iowa players in Iowa. And we're seeing great results because of that.
How different is it to recruit these Iowa kids? Because I'm a high school coach here in Nebraska, and it's different. Iowa high school plays in the summer, so you have some kids that choose to play high school ball over travel ball, or vice versa. So how different is it for you to recruit some of these kids that are homegrown talent, knowing, are they playing high school ball? Are they playing travel ball? Like, how does it work?
Yeah. I mean, for me, and I'm very open about that. I want them to play high school. I want them to play through high school. To me, it's very important that you support your community. And in Iowa, if we don't support our community, we won't have sports in Iowa. You know, we've got small towns that are like multi-sport athletes, and you have to be able to play multi-sports in order to have the sport at that high school. I mean, I graduated in Danville with 54 kids in my class. If you didn't play every sport, you didn't have that sport. You know, so I try to encourage that. It's like, yes, the summer ball, you get a chance to get seen. We have a fall season, and you know, instead of summer ball, there's a fall season that they can go out and play travel ball. But I really do encourage that. We don't want to lose sports in Iowa because we're going all summer league. And I know a lot of programs, California is that way too. A lot of players don't play for the high school; they just play in the summer league. So I try to encourage that. It doesn't matter how bad your high school team may be, you can make it better. You know, you can start and develop that yourself by just staying with your high school. So I have a passion about that message is stay with your community. You know, your community is what's back to you your whole life. And I love the summer league programs. I think coaches are doing a great job with that, but we need to be able to keep our players playing for high school so we can keep them in Iowa.
One more.
Nebraska's tough. I feel for you. You know, it's same thing. Farming communities. It's a tough job.
Yeah, the weather doesn't help here either. No. We'll get you out on this. You start out with Penn State this week, and then Nebraska. Mm-hmm. Two good teams, and especially in the case of Penn State, a great pitching staff. How prepared do you feel your hitters are for the challenge against two great pitching staffs like that to begin conference play?
Yeah, well, we got 2 days to prepare for it. So, you know, it's interesting. For these last 6 weeks, we're planning for 5 teams every weekend, 5 different teams every weekend. So it's tasking. And then this last week we were in Florida for 10 days and played 10 different games. So it's like preparing for that many teams. It's going to feel like a breeze now. You know, we got one team to focus on, making sure that our next 2 practices are on 2 pitchers and not 10 different pitchers that we're trying to figure out how to go up against. So I think being able to get into the Big Ten and play and really just focusing on what that team has. They have the same information on us that we have on them. So it's just going to be a coaching challenge, you know, who's going to prepare their kids best for what we have. And, you know, she's done a great job, Penn State. We look across the board with Maryland and Rutgers, Penn State, you know, Michigan State. They're all developing their programs and are growing. And you can see the records across the Big Ten are solid. I'm excited about that. You know, we want that Big Ten to be one of the top conferences in the country. So the coaches that are in there right now are doing that. So it's going to be a challenge. We're looking forward to it. And I think between Penn State and, of course, Ron at Nebraska, you know, she did an incredible job of winning the conference championship last year and getting her team playing like they're expected to play. You know, they just did a great job, you know, going to regional. So it's going to be tough, but we're excited about only focusing on one team for the weekend. Yeah.
Little easier to say the least. Well, hey, we appreciate your time, giving us a little time as you get ready for Big Ten play, and thanks for joining us here on Behind.
Thank you. And Brian Levan says hi, so thank you for supporting us and supporting Iowa.
I'll say hi to him back. I know I gave him a little phone call on my way in this morning just to say hi, but he's been a great addition to your staff as well.
Oh, my coaching staff is top notch. Yeah, he's brought a lot of you know, support for me, which has been great. You know, here, military man coming out, 20 years in the Army and Special Forces. I mean, just incredible. Just his demeanor and his love for these players, his love for Christ. I mean, it's been incredible to have him part of our team. And then Mandy coming in and just it's the best. And I've got Aaron that's with us, a volunteer assistant coach that coached high school here in Iowa. So, you know, with our staff, it's very exciting to see where we're going to go with this year.
Well, best of luck to you. And I hope to see you at some point this season.
That's a deal. Home, hopefully. Come out to Nebraska, come to Iowa.
I'll come visit you. Okay.
That's right. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
You bet. Take care. Thank you, Coach. Renee Gillespie had a terrific run at UCF and now trying to rebuild the Iowa program. And she mentioned the Gail Blevins era, and we've brought it up a couple of times that Iowa was among the top programs in the Big Ten Conference. Then Gail's career wound down. They hire Marla Looper, and she just wasn't really a fit there. and I think alienated some Iowa folks, which is why there was such a talent drain in that area. And now Renee Gillespie is tasked with rebuilding all of that, and she has made some ground in that pursuit.
Yeah, and I think about some of these players that have come out of the state of Iowa. The first two names that come to mind of recent, Kendall Lindemann.
Oh, yes.
Molly Jacobson.
Mm-hmm.
Those are just the two names that stand out to me.
Chelsea Thomas from Missouri.
Oh my goodness, that's a throwback.
That's a few years ago, but yeah.
But yes,
Lindemann going to Minnesota and then to Florida. I mean, that's a national level player that they lost.
Yes, absolutely. And then Jacobson, she went to DMAC for her first 2 years, and then ended up at Ole Miss, and then ended up at Texas. But it's still like you look at some of these players that have come out of the state of Iowa, and you're like, man, if only they stayed home.
Right.
What could have been.
Absolutely. And it troubles you a little bit that they do leave Iowa, and you know, that the feeling that Nebraskans have about the Huskers, I think, is pretty similar to the feeling that Iowans have about the Hawkeyes. I mean, of course, there are Iowa Staters there, but the fact that so many players left that area, and you look around, Minnesota got great as a result. Wisconsin was built up because of it. Nebraska has been able to get a couple of players. I mean, Kaylin Kinney is a top-notch player when she's healthy. So it has been a double whammy, really, for Iowa softball, in the sense that they're losing these players and they're all going to programs around them. And again, Renee Gillespie trying to reverse that trend.
Yeah. But you also mentioned, you know, how the same thing happens in Nebraska too. I mean, the amount of talent that comes out of the two states of Iowa and Nebraska is absolutely ridiculous. And I think I say that confidently because when we look at who's leading the NCAA right now in certain categories, they're from these two states.
Sure.
Right? Nia Carter has 49 hits. She's leading the Big Ten Conference. She's like second overall in the NCAA. And then you look out the West Coast. Ruby Malin made her way up to Washington. And then last night I'm watching Arkansas and Alabama, and Casey Hoffman and Lauren Kamenzen are hitting in the heart of the Arkansas lineup, and they're both from Omaha. So then there's Jordy Ball, right?
Right. Jordy Ball's her own category.
I mean, that's her own thing. But I look around at all of this talent that comes from these two states, and I'm like, man, if they just stayed home.
Sure. And there's an immense passion for softball that has been somewhat overshadowed by the great volleyball that's been played, at least here in Nebraska. Iowa's its own animal, but especially here in the state of Nebraska, volleyball has gotten the attention, and deservedly so.
Yes.
The Huskers have won national championships. Creighton and Omaha at the D1 level have been great, and really, you know, top to bottom, whether it's Midland or UNK, Hastings, whatever, even the lower level colleges have been great. And notably, great players have left the state of Nebraska and gone on to play D1 elsewhere. But there's just so much volleyball talent that, of course, Nebraska sustains. But the fact is that the volleyball success overshadows what's been built in softball as well. And there is more talent than I think people realize that's from the state. And fortunately, Rhonda Revelle has been able to get a good amount of that talent and raise Nebraska's profile. I mean, Billy Andrews is an in-state kid, and Brooke has played well lately, just to name two off the top of my head. But there is more talent here than I think the state gets credit for it. And the same is true with Iowa. And it's important. I mean, your recruiting philosophy, I think, usually begins with close down your borders. Right. It doesn't matter the sport, doesn't matter the program. Close your borders, best players in your state, go play for your team.
Yeah. And it's interesting to hear Coach Gillespie talk about her thoughts on her kids playing high school ball compared to travel ball, because when I think about travel ball here, Nebraska Gold won a national championship a couple years ago with this heavy loaded roster of local Nebraska talent. that Jordy Ball, Ruby were both on that team, but there were 12 Division I players on that national championship roster, and they're all over the place. That not all of them stayed home.
Sure.
And so when you look at that, you're like, man, softball here, it's so good. And I feel so lucky to be in the position I'm in, not only talking about the sport, but also being involved with it and coaching and seeing it firsthand.
Sure.
Because then I'm able to see, man, holy moly. I know I missed Ruby by a year, thank goodness, because I coach in the same conference as Scott.
Right.
So I was like, oh, okay, I escaped that. So, but Barnard.
Sure. Addie Barnard from Beatrice, and she's had a terrific career at Wichita, and her sister's going down to play for the Shockers, and they've certainly built something there. Of course, being a Beatrice grad, I take pride in what the city of Beatrice and that high school has been able to do as a program, first off, and then the players going on to Nebraska and elsewhere. Of course, Alicia Armstrong on the College World Series team about a decade ago. My God, a decade ago. And then just historically, through the years, kids have come out of Beatrice, which is a small, it's a town of 12,000 people, and yet they've been able to make a dent at the Division I level. Well, we move on to the Big Ten. And the Big Ten power rankings. And, I left it out where I've had Iowa in our power rankings. And I think that was a little cagey on my part, but, I think Rene would understand maybe not having them first or second.
Well, yeah. However,
maybe I've had them low, maybe I haven't.
They've been a little too low on your radar.
Well, we shall see. Hey, the rubber meets the road in Big Ten play, and of course that begins this weekend. So, we get to confirm or have refuted our assumptions and our beliefs about the conference. All right, Maren, you want to lead off with your top 3 or 4 in the Big Ten?
Well, kudos to you for sticking with Northwestern. So,
yes, go on.
Oh man. Well, let's go ahead. I've had Northwestern at 3 the past couple weeks.
Yep.
And now I'm like, man, here they are. So let's go ahead and move them up.
Sure.
So Northwestern, Maryland, Nebraska, Minnesota.
Okay. My first 2 are identical. Northwestern 4-1. Maryland goes 3-1. Last week they lose at Texas Tech, but avenge it. I feel a little vindicated on the Northwestern placement, but no disrespect to Maryland. And I mean, Lubbock, Texas is the end of the earth, and the fact that they went down there and went 3-1 and split, I'm not troubled by the fact that they didn't win both of them. So I've got the Terps second. Number 3 is Ohio State. And I feel like maybe I'm buying into them a little too much. They went undefeated last weekend against a pretty easy schedule. But, it's just one of those deals where they haven't lost.
They're on a 10-game winning streak.
Right. And they won 8 last week. I don't know that they have a good win on their resume yet. I don't. There's not a win that they've put on that sticks in my mind as a quote unquote good win or great win. But they just win, baby, and you just win, and you keep floating up the rankings. So I bumped them up to 2, and then I put Minnesota 4th. And maybe I'm buying. Maybe I'm a little recency bias with the Gophers.
I had them there too. It's
okay.
I see what you're seeing.
But yeah, I bumped them up 4 spots because they beat Wichita State. And that carries some weight with me.
Yes.
Like we've talked quite a bit about Wichita State. I think the Shockers have put together a good year. They're a good team. They're going to win the American. And the fact that they were able to go down there and win a game is pretty notable to me. So I bumped Minnesota to 4th. I'm still not entirely sold on their pitching staff, Still not entirely sold on them, but the fact of the matter is, especially the last couple of weeks, they've achieved. So I've got them 4.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
If you're high up on Ohio State winning 10 games in a row, how high is Indiana winning 12?
I mean, that's a lot of wins. That's a lot of wins, and I've got Indiana quite a ways down my list. And you know, it's one of those deals where maybe I'm just not quite ready to move them into that upper echelon. You know, 7 Big Ten teams made regionals last year. And then I've kind of had identified as Penn State and Maryland as the next 2. So I feel like that's been a shelf. And I haven't been able to put Indiana above that shelf yet, because I don't feel like they've had that sort of win that tells me they're ready to be a regional team. So they're a ways down the list for me. Though they had a good week. Don't get me wrong.
They did. They've won 12 games in a row.
They've had a couple good weeks in a row. All right, so we covered our first 4. What do you have 5 through 8?
5 through 8. I have, see, now is when I have Ohio State, Penn State, and Wisconsin.
Okay. All right. So I've got the Huskers at 5. I don't know if you could tell, but I was a little disappointed about that Kansas loss.
You were.
And I feel like there are ample opportunities for Nebraska to turn things around. You know, the series against Purdue, the doubleheader at Iowa, then the big weekend series next weekend against Michigan. And though the Wolverines are a little bit down from where they've been, it's still Michigan. So the Huskers have 5 games to ramp themselves up for that series. If the weather's good, the crowds are going to be great again because of the brand name. And so it's an opportunity for Nebraska to get things right. I've got the Huskers at 5. Wisconsin, I've got 6. And this may even feel a little low, but I couldn't bump them up last week because they didn't play. And I'm surprised by that scheduling philosophy by Yvette Healy to give the Badgers essentially a week and a half off right before Big Ten play. I would think you would want to be at your absolute sharpest. You would want to be in a rhythm. I'm sure it was a spring break deal, and she figured, well, we've got to, they've been at it for 6 weeks. We got to send them home. But Wisconsin was playing pretty well.
Yeah.
And they break off their season now. I don't know that that's the best preparation for them for Big Ten play, but they're at 6. I'm not so sure that isn't a little low, but you know, you also don't know what you're going to get when they come off that break. Now they go to East Lansing this weekend, so you feel like that's an opportunity to get right, but there again, they need to get right. And then I've got Illinois at 7, and you know, the Illini were kind of my riser last week, and they fall this week. They only played 3 games. They were 1-2, but they weren't terribly competitive against Missouri. And so that tells me, you know, if you're not competitive against Mizzou and the Tigers are toward the bottom of the top 25, you know, that's a step down from Northwestern, Maryland, Ohio State. So I had to drop the Illini a little bit to 7.
And that was a doubleheader against a Mizzou team that was coming off of being completely shut out in 3 games against Kentucky.
Right.
To open their conference play. So you felt like, okay, Mizzou is either going to come out guns a-blazing or Illinois is going to steamroll them. And I felt like, yeah, I agree with you on how Illinois looked. Yeah. It was kind of flat.
Yeah, and you feel bad because weather interfered with their schedule as well. But at the same time, you know, we've got to measure you on what got played. And, you know, you drop a couple games to Mizzou, that changes your perspective. All right, 8 through 11. What do you have?
All right. Now this is where I have Illinois.
Okay.
Okay.
I can live with that.
All right. Rutgers. And Iowa. This is that range. I've had Iowa hanging out like 6 through 8. I'd probably put them at somewhere around the 8-9 area right now. However, they're not in that bottom tier.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've got Penn State at 8. I feel a little bad about it. I dropped them a spot from last week in a 3-0 week. Now they didn't play terribly tough competition last week. Their schedule was a little screwed up due to weather, but I bumped up Minnesota and had to bump a couple people up. So I dropped Penn State to 8. I've got Michigan at 9, and I don't necessarily feel great about it. They competed very well with Kentucky.
They did.
Michigan's not a program that's in the business of moral victories, but that might be their best performance of the year in some respects. I mean, playing a team like Kentucky that tough, they're sitting at 13-11 coming into this week.
They're not scoring.
Yeah, and they suffered significant losses to that lineup through graduation. That's probably been the most disturbing parts, that they've not hit a little better. You figured pitching would be a little erratic after losing Alex Storako and Megan Bobian's graduation, but they just aren't hitting at the level at which we expect. Here's where I have Indiana at 10. And again, this is one of those where my preseason biases are hurting Indiana. Now they've got a chance to bust through them. They play Maryland this week. 3-game series in Bloomington. All right, you want to prove that you're one of those teams that can be a regional team? Do it this week.
Right.
Because you've got a Maryland team that's also a challenger, but a Maryland team that quite frankly has had a great non-conference season. But you've got them at home. You're playing well as Indiana. You want to push your way into regional consideration and sort of being that sort of team. Here's your chance.
Yeah.
So I've been waiting to buy into Indiana. Like you said, they've won 12 in a row. That's pretty impressive, but they get their chance this weekend.
Yeah, I agree with you. Maryland has been hot all year. If Indiana wins a series, I would say they don't have to sweep, just win the series.
Win the series, yep.
Then you'll gain a little bit more respect from me on that, because I still have them towards the bottom. Not a knock, because they've won 12 in a row. I can't ignore that. However, it's who they're beating in that 12 in a row.
It's a pretty easy schedule at this point. I mean, they beat Belmont, Northwestern State, Memphis, and Northwestern State and Memphis twice.
Yeah.
That's not a compelling schedule. And I know most teams taper off with their non-con this time of year. All right, we're to the bottom 4. Who do you have?
We're in the bottom 4. That's Indiana, Michigan, Purdue, Michigan State. I cannot believe I have Michigan in the bottom 4. I never thought I'd see the day where I have Michigan in the bottom 4, but
yeah,
they're not big bad Michigan.
No, they're not. Carol Hutchins' retirement changes that picture pretty significantly, and then just the losses to that roster. Still, there's a ton of talent there. I feel like I'm hanging on to Michigan higher than maybe I should.
Maybe.
But at the same time, you also wonder, all right, at some point they're going to start scoring runs, right?
You would think.
You would think.
But if they're sitting at 13-11.
Yeah.
What happens if they're sitting at that point at the end of the year? Is that a Michigan team that gets into the tournament on name alone?
Boy, they've got to do some work.
Because they're not, to me, they're not maybe they're a 3 seed.
They're
maybe.
I would be interested to see early season bracketology, because I don't think they're in right now. And you look at how they start the Big Ten: at Ohio State for 3, at Nebraska for 3, at Michigan State, then Illinois for 3. So, I don't know that they're favored in any of those 3 series.
I don't know.
And then you go to Michigan State. Okay, you expect Michigan to beat Michigan State.
Right.
But other than that, they need to go win one of those 3 series at Ohio State, at Nebraska, Illinois on the road, at home, to push their way in to where they overcome what was a pretty disappointing non-conference schedule. I mean, yeah, you've got Michigan lower than me, but I think I'm still, like I said, I'm still holding on to what I think they were. But they're going to have their chance to prove to me that they still are here in Big Ten play. Okay, Rutgers is 11 for me. 6-3 week for them last week. I just don't know what to make of them. The record looks good at 23-10, but their schedule's been easy.
It has.
So yeah, they've piled up some wins. And again, not a big criticism of them of scheduling easy. That program needs to build confidence, but I'm not ready to declare them a good team. They might be a tough out in the Big Ten, but I don't see it with them yet. Purdue is 12. Between Purdue and Iowa, it was kind of a coin flip for me.
You have Iowa all the way down there.
I do. The loss to Texas for the Hawkeyes doesn't trouble me. Lehigh is a decent loss, but I'm still not there with the Hawkeyes. Again, maybe I've got them a touch low. I don't love Purdue at 12, Iowa at 13. I could go either way there.
Okay.
And then Michigan State at 14, they had the week off. So
I mean, yeah, Michigan State has a long way to go before they climb out of that number 14 spot.
I hate to say it, but you know, Sharonda McDonald's got an uphill climb. That program's never really gotten anything going. And then look at how they start Big Ten play this year. Wisconsin at home, 3-game series, at Maryland, home game against Michigan. Then the 3 games home against Iowa, but then 3 home against Minnesota, at Michigan, at Illinois. That's a tough start. And they're going to have a tough time building traction in Big Ten play to where they can have some confidence moving forward. So I hate to say it, but old Sparty might be 14th for a while.
Yeah, and you hope that once conference play starts, that your midweeks will give you a little bit of a confidence booster between series. But I mean, they've got for them, their midweeks are Michigan,
right,
and Notre Dame.
Yeah, Notre Dame's darn tough too. So it's not like you get a break there.
No,
but should be interesting to watch. Those are our Big Ten power rankings, and I think we'll get a pretty significant shuffle in them next week after the first week of conference play. And that'll conclude episode 3 of Behind the Plate with Maren and Nate. Appreciate you listening in. Our thanks as well to Iowa head coach Renee Gillespie for joining us. Again, thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe, tell your friends. This is where to learn everything you need to know about Big Ten softball. Thanks for listening.